Michael Fedo. He is he's written pieces that's ended up in newspapers. He's written books about the lynchings in Duluth, and has a fantastic book called Adventures of the Midwest Author, which has tons of great advice for aspiring and hoping to be professional writers.
You have to begin with the notion that you are a writer, whether you've published or not. When I used to teach some writing courses at the Loft in Minneapolis, I would ask the students to rank their life roles. Now, most of my students then were women, and so they might put wife and mother first, and then friend, and writer would be about sixth. And I would always say, you have to flip that. If you're going to write, writing has to be right at the top of those priorities.
Strangely, I wasn't devastated. I somehow, perhaps arrogantly, intuited that Aryan's acolytes were wrong. It was true I had no experience with war or prisons or disintegrating families, subjects addressed in other stories I submitted. But what I understood, even before I took myself seriously as a writer, was that writers are not necessarily limited to writing only what they know. They like to discover what they don't know, to discover and articulate what they think about topics and issues. In short, writers are risk-takers and evolving learners, not restricted to narrow parameters of life as personally encountered. And way back then, I somehow knew these truths, and that made me less vulnerable to the scoldings by the teacher and fellow students.
Well, I don't know if this is a pitfall, but if you're going to do this, you have to be tough. You can't get discouraged with rejections. And I've always told myself, although I must say I certainly have gotten discouraged, but I've always told myself that the editor who turns down something I've written is wrong. And somewhere down the line, somebody will get it right. And that's invariably happened.
I'd like to go to Michael. You have written a short story called The Carnival, and it has actually been rather successful in the fact that it's in anthologies worldwide at this point. Now, there is a hitch to that in something that I think a lot of young young authors are unfamiliar with is the world of rights and how selling rights work. I just would like to go a little bit more into your viewpoint on that, as you do have I think, significant experience with that, and how an author can be confident in what amount of rights they want to sell of a work and how much they don't.
Well, excuse me, I made a mistake, clearly, with that story. I surrendered all rights to the story. And I did it because they paid me more than I ever got for anything else I'd ever written. And I could not envision that 50 years later this story would still be in textbooks. I just got a letter from some students in the Philippines who were reading this story. This is 50 years later. And at the time I thought, this is just a one-off. They're going to publish it and that's it. And I'm getting several $100s more than I made in my teaching job for a month. So, I was 28 years old. I could never have envisioned this kind of thing happening with that story. So, the lesson is, try very hard, and it's probably not that hard, to not surrender all rights to whatever you create. You just don't do it.
Now, the questions I'm often asked in forums like this are, why was it useful or important to dredge up this incident after so many years? What good can possibly come of it now? For a number of years, I really didn't have what I thought was a good answer to those, except to say that a writer is always on the lookout for good stories, and this happened to be a good story. Awful, horrible, certainly, but a riveting story nonetheless.
When you're approaching a magazine or a newspaper with a pitch of a story, what makes you feel confident in that story that you've written?
Usually the pitch is before you've written it. And you factor everything in. What's this going to be about, and why should it have an appeal for editor A, or whoever it is? And so, you have to write a pretty good query letter to get a positive response from the editor that you're pitching it to. Quite often, in my case, the first couple of sentences may be the first couple of sentences in the piece itself. If I've written a good lead, I will lead the query with that, and then follow up with some of the details that I will fill in this piece with. And then I can also speculate. I know that they don't want anything longer than 1,000 words, so I'll tell them that this will probably come in at 850 words, whatever, and hope to hear from you. It's like that.